Ancient Rome, one of the greatest superpowers in history, whose far-reaching legacy continues to shape our lives.
For close on 1,000 years, the Romans dominated the known world. Theirs was an extraordinary empire that heralded an age of unprecedented prosperity and stability, but that also ruled through violence and oppression.
Rome's rise to greatness wasn't inevitable. Its epic history was often decided by single critical moments.
In this series, I'm exploring 8 key days that I believe help to explain Rome's remarkable success.
To understand the full significance of these 8 days, I'm travelling across the Roman world.
I am incredibly lucky to get access to this archaeological site.
Examining remarkable finds.
These are the only Roman imperial insignia ever to have survived.
And investigating the complexities of what it was to be Roman. This is the day in May 337 AD when the dying Emperor Constantine was baptised in a final commitment to a new religion that would shape the next 1,000 years of Rome's story and human history.
I shall from this time prescribe to myself such a course of life as befits his service.
Constantine the Great, as he'll come to be called, is for me one of the most fascinating and complex characters in Roman history.
Constantine broke with the pagan past of ancient Rome and founded a new capital for the empire. His decisions still live with us today. The Roman Empire had first exploded across the Mediterranean world as a republic, a limited form of people power that ruled, in theory at least, for the benefit of all citizens. But it expanded to its greatest extent under imperial rule, peaking in the 2nd century AD. The great size of the empire brought with it great stresses to government, and soon it began to struggle, simply too big to be ruled by one man.
Weak leadership, civil wars and barbarian invasions threw the empire into crisis. Emperors came and went at a dizzying speed. No fewer than 50 in 50 years, many of them killed by their own armies.
So, in 293 AD, a radical reform was introduced in an attempt to save the empire from disaster. It was divided into 4 parts, with 4 capitals and a different emperor based in each, all working together to keep Rome strong. The system worked for a while, but it had one major flaw.
With 4 times as many emperors, there was 4 times the scope for rivalry, 4 times as many succession disputes, and by 312 AD, the system had completely broken down. The empire was racked once again by civil war.
But one man would restore order to this disintegrating empire and set Rome on a new course with Christianity at its heart.
We're told that he was the illegitimate son of a Greek barmaid, and his name was Constantine.
The transformation of the Roman Empire was secured by one emblematic day that came at the end of Constantine's remarkable life. The elderly emperor was travelling east on a military campaign when he became seriously ill. The events of this day were recorded by his biographer Eusebius of Caesarea from eyewitness accounts.
How far have we come? It didn't feel very far at all.
Over 50 miles. We could set off back to Constantinople in the morning.
Retreating. Resting. It's nothing more than weakness, indecision, cowardliness. You go back one time, and you will go back every time after that.
I just meant because you are a little bit ill.
We're not going back.
As he lay dying that day, Eusebius tells us that Constantine reflected on his life, looking back at his extraordinary achievements and his deepest regrets. Constantine had been born 65 years earlier in the city of Naissus in what is today Serbia. Although his mother was a humble barmaid, we're told, Constantine's father was a Roman general who became one of the 4 emperors of the divided empire. When his father died on campaign in York, Constantine, who was now a general himself, was acclaimed successor by his troops. He took control of the northwestern section of the empire, basing himself in Trier. Meanwhile, there was turmoil elsewhere in the empire when a general seized power in Rome for himself. His name was Maxentius. From his base in Trier, Constantine saw this instability as an opportunity to claim control of more of the fractured imperial territories. With the support of his troops, he marched south to confront the usurper Maxentius.
The decisive showdown took place here at a crossing of the River Tiber called Milvian Bridge, just outside the city. It was a confrontation critical to Constantine's rise to power.
And a key chapter in the story of his spiritual transformation. A story which would end in the rebirth of the Empire of Rome. In 337 AD, as Emperor Constantine lay dying, his biographer Eusebius tells us he used this time to reflect on the sins it had been his lot to commit during his bloody rise to power.
It's not good. I fear the odds are quite seriously stacked against him.
The odds are always against me.
25 years earlier, Constantine had taken on Emperor Maxentius in a vicious battle at the Milvian Bridge on the outskirts of Rome, the first steps to unify the broken empire.
Maxentius had 150,000 men. How many did we have, Quintus?
Less than 40,000.
Less than 40,000. Who could prevail against those odds? I remember taking my sword from a man's chest and chopping the top of another man's head off. Now I wonder what God let him down in his moment of need. My cavalry swept along the flanks of his soldiers, trampling and slaying all that stood in their way. Maxentius and his men became confused and started to flee in all directions. I had my eyes set on Maxentius, but he fled back towards the city. He tried to cross the bridge, but it collapsed with the weight of so many fleeing soldiers. When I saw Maxentius floating in the water, I felt no triumph. Maybe it was because so many soldiers drowned with him, so many families, lost fathers, and brothers, and sons.
Constantine had been merciless, and in the aftermath of his great victory, he rode into Rome, Maxentius's head displayed on a spear before him. His devastating victory at the Milvian Bridge meant he became the sole ruler of the western half of the empire. The grand prize, Rome, was his. In Rome's civil wars at this time, it was common for the victors to create monuments to their success.
Well, now Constantine was going to prove that he was in charge. And just look at how he did it. Isn't it brilliant? So what you're looking at here are the colossal remains of a statue that originally stood 12 metres high and dominated a basilica, a kind of swanky town hall that Maxentius had built. All this is pretty impressive now, but just imagine what it was like when it was first made. I just love all of this because it is such a serious bit of 3D PR. Move over, Constantine is saying. I am the ruler of Rome now.
Constantine attempted to eradicate all traces of Maxentius's brief time in power. But one thing escaped him, and it was only rediscovered in 2006 at the base of the Palatine Hill in the heart of Rome. We've been given privileged access here in the vaults of the National Museum of Italy.
Now, it is genuinely exciting to see these, because these are the only Roman imperial insignia ever to have survived. The whole thing was buried in a wooden box and wrapped in the silk of imperial banners. These are sceptres, so these had been held by the emperor to prove his power. This beautiful one would have been covered in gold leaf and it's topped with a blue orb representing the globe, which, by the way, reminds us that the Romans didn't believe that the earth was flat. Now, we think that this whole thing would have been buried by Maxentius's followers to preserve his memory. And the fantastic thing is that it's worked, because for 1700 years, all of this was kept safe, and now we can share it with the world.
In stark contrast, Constantine as the victor was able to flaunt his triumph. This magnificent arch in the heart of Rome celebrates his victory against Maxentius, but it also hints at a surprising new influence guiding Constantine to victory at Milvian Bridge.
You've got Constantine defeating the barbarians and giving handouts to the masses and being crowned by the goddess of victory, as well as a few bespoke images like Maxentius's men drowning in the Tiber. But then, up there at the top, there's a cryptic, potentially game-changing inscription. Constantine, inspired by the divinity, delivered the state from the tyrant.
This mention of divinity hints at an event that later Christian authors were eager to commemorate, and that quickly became a significant feature of Constantine's life story. That, on the eve of battle with Maxentius, the emperor was confronted with a luminous vision in the sky. Christ then came to him in a dream, declaring, "With this sign you shall conquer." Constantine shared what he'd seen with his troops. Some said that sign was a kind of cross,
made out of the two Greek letters, chi, rho, which are the first two letters of the name Christ. Some sources tell us that Constantine ordered his soldiers to paint this sign on their shields, and emblazoned thus, the vision's prophecy was fulfilled, and Constantine could claim a victory thanks to Christ.
Whether or not Constantine was really motivated by a Christian vision around this time, it seems he did help the rulers of the empire come to terms with their Christian minority.
Within just a few months, Constantine does seem to pin his colours firmly to the Christian mast by backing an edict that stops the persecution of Christians right across the Roman Empire.
Until this point, the overriding belief system of Rome was paganism, a diverse religion of many gods which rewarded offerings such as animal sacrifice. But Christianity was a new cult on the rise. As many as 1 in 10 citizens were Christians, and it made great political sense for a man who was determined to unify the empire to embrace this curious new religion with its radical philosophies. Alexander Evers is an expert in early Roman Christianity.
In this period, Christianity is very much on the fringes of society. It's an odd element within the traditional Roman world, where those traditional values of strength and courage are very, very important, and all of a sudden you get a group that comes in and preaches to the humble and meek and promises them paradise.
So it's really interesting then that Constantine seems to be attracted to this fledgling faith.
It's almost as if Constantine thinks, heck, let's give this a go and see what happens. After his conversion, his troops will follow him gradually over time. He begins to build churches everywhere. Christians are allowed to practice their faith in the open.
But he does still keep his options open, doesn't he?
He cannot just cut all the ties with the old traditional Roman religion. He doesn't want to. That would have been political suicide. And perhaps as there's little voice in the back of his mind saying, you never know.
I think Constantine's interest in Christianity was genuine, and he soon fed Christian ideas into the ethos of the empire. The first steps in a revolutionary new direction for Rome. He abolished crucifixion and outlawed gladiator fights. Social justice was now on his imperial agenda. But while these Christian ideals were coming into play in some quarters of the empire, there was trouble and turmoil at its heart. By 314 AD, the Roman world was now consolidated into two halves, East and West. The Western Empire was unified under Constantine. The East had been brought together by an emperor called Licinius. But Constantine's ambition couldn't allow for a rival, so he'd need a pretext to go to war with another Roman co-ruler. According to the historian Zosimus, it was Licinius who provided it. Rather than attack on the battlefield, Licinius attempted a regime change by stealth. And one night in 316 AD, he sent his cousin to Rome with orders to assassinate Constantine and his eldest son, Crispus. But Constantine had word of the plot and was ready.
It is never good when someone attempts to take the life of an emperor, dear Crispus. But that does not mean the emperor cannot use it for gain.
End this now. Kill me.
I could kill you. But that wouldn't end this. Continue to lie. And when Quintus has ran out of parts to cut off you, he will bring in your children one by one and cut parts off them. Confess that it was Licinius who sent you to kill me, and I will spare your children.
I confess Licinius wants you dead. He sent me. Constantine, promise me my children will be spared.
Thank you, Bassianus. Thank you.
Constantine's new Christian ideals didn't hinder his relentless drive. With this justification for war, one half of the empire was now pitted against the other. They fought for 8 years, Constantine pushing deep into Licinius's territory in the east. The decisive battle came in the year 324 AD.
This is the Bosphorus Straits, with Asia on one side and Europe on the other. And these waters, as well as a battleground on the Asian side, saw ferocious fighting between Constantine and Licinius. We're told that once again, Constantine raised his Christian standard to rally his troops, and Christian authors of the time described the conflict not as a battle between emperors, but a battle between good and evil.
After pinning his new Christian colours to the mast, Constantine launched a final massive assault on Licinius, destroying his forces. With his victory, the broken pieces of the empire had finally reunited under Constantine's sole rule. He founded a city just across the straits from his triumph. Built on what had been Byzantium, he would call his city Constantinople.
The idea of Rome seemed to be back on track. One empire, one emperor, and a leader who was blessed with fortune in war. But Constantine had a challenge. He had to achieve something that no emperor had managed in a century, to give peace and stability to his people while holding on to power.
To preserve his newly restored empire for future generations, Constantine planned to consolidate power through his family, headed by his eldest son Crispus. But the dream of a new imperial dynasty would soon turn into a nightmare that would haunt him to his dying day.
Can I really be forgiven?
Emperor Constantine had won control of the Roman world, bringing the empire back under the rule of one man. He then looked to secure his legacy through his descendants. Here in the Netherlands, in the Leiden Museum of Antiquities, is an artifact that shows us how the emperor attempted to reinstate the old Roman system of hereditary succession. He put his family full front and centre of political life.
This gorgeously carved cameo seems to be signalling the importance of 4 key members of Constantine's family. So that's Constantine there in the middle, and that's Helena, his mother, at the back, Fausta, his wife here, and his eldest son Crispus by his first wife. It's absolutely packed with clues and interest. First of all, just the fact that there are 2 women there at all is very unusual, as is the fact that Constantine and Fausta are gazing adoringly at one another. Believe you me, this does not often happen on official imperial portraits. Both the women are pointing at Crispus, who's wearing a helmet and carrying a sword, as if he's destined for imperial greatness. And it does seem at this point that he was being groomed for succession. So it looks as though Crispus is indeed Constantine's favourite.
But Constantine's desire for his tight-knit family to help him rule would never be realised.
I was dreaming of my son Crispus. He should be here now. And everything I have built should be his. You have done very well this day, Crispus. This is as much your victory as it is mine.
So much death.
I loved him. I nursed him. I schooled him. I trained him.
Constantine's eldest son Crispus was born to his first wife, Minervina. But we know that the emperor chose a woman better connected. In 307 AD, the emperor had taken a second wife, Fausta.
I chose Fausta to replace my first wife. I thought that was reward enough. I didn't agree to replace my first boy.
Help me. Help me, Constantine. Help me. Guide me. Help me.
What's wrong? What's happened?
Crispus. He came to my room. I ran from him. I hid from him, but he caught me and he beat me.
Crispus?
He lay with me.
When Constantine heard the alleged crimes of Crispus against his stepmother Fausta, he ordered the arrest, trial, and execution of his beloved son and heir.
I was angry. I didn't hesitate. Why didn't I hesitate?
It is done.
I have done many terrible things, but none more terrible than that. My mother came to me, day after day, night after night. She told me Fausta had accused Crispus of forcing himself upon her, so that I would get rid of Crispus and replace him with her son. You see, I am not great. I'm a fool. A pawn to a woman.
All fall short.
Now, Constantine's anger turned against the woman who'd apparently deceived him.
Pray with me. Can I really be forgiven?
You're Constantine. You're a great warrior and servant of the one true God.
Should I be forgiven?
Now, we're told this story by the Roman historian Zosimus, who was writing 200 years after the event, but had access to earlier texts. Even at this distance, it is horrifically chilling. It seems that Constantine had annihilated all that he held dear. And tellingly, and really unusually for an emperor, we know that he never married again.
With the death of his wife and son, Constantine's plans for a dynasty were over. Instead, he threw himself into the project that would shape the dynamics of the known world from here on in. His new city of Constantinople. It's now Istanbul in Turkey, where East meets West, North meets South, and where Asia meets Europe. It's here the great trade routes connect, leading to a wonderfully cosmopolitan sharing of goods and ideas.
In many ways, this is what ancient Constantinople would have been like, really buzzing with people. We know that in the markets there, as many as 40 languages were recorded, and they were selling everything from silks and sesame seeds to spices from the Far East. So it is a little bit like travelling back in time coming here.
Just 4 years after the death of his wife and son, Constantine moved full-time to the city that bore his name. He celebrated its role as the heart of his empire with construction projects that combined both pagan and Christian imagery, traces of which still survive.
I'm really fond of this monument, even though it is a bit beaten up today, because it is just such a dogged survivor through 1,700 years of history. And boy, it must have been impressive in its heyday. So originally, that purple column rose over 50 metres high, and it was topped with an image of Constantine as the great sun god Apollo, complete with golden crown. Now, it's really interesting, all of this, because as well as all the pagan imagery, there was loads of Christian stuff. So in the crown were set the nails that nailed Christ to the cross. And if that weren't enough, we're told that buried underneath there was the very axe that Noah used to build the ark, as well as the bread baskets that Christ used to feed the 5,000. So it's all kinds of power, Christian and pagan, Eastern and Western, Greek and Roman, jumbled up together. And now it's become the city's favourite hangout for pigeons. Constantinople came to boast the very best of Rome. So where I'm walking now was originally a chariot racing track to rival the Circus Maximus back in Rome. There was a senate packed with senators in togas, imperial palace, and Roman movers and shakers, including the nouveau riche and young bloods, were enticed to move here with the promise of villas and free food. In fact, this place would come to be called the second or New Rome.
Hidden beneath the modern city of Istanbul on the banks of the Bosphorus, secrets of the New Rome's transformation following Constantine's rule are still being revealed. And under a local restaurant is a site only recently discovered, which would become the beating heart of Constantinople's imperial command.
Istanbul is built up like a kind of historical layer cake, so there's still a lot of the Roman city left buried underground, and it is an enormous treat to be here. I've never managed to get down here before. We know that Constantine the Great built a beautiful imperial palace that he called the Sacred Palace, and it's where the emperors lived for centuries, and this is what's left of it. We think that where I'm standing right now was the audience chamber, where the great and the good from across the empire would come to pay their respects to the new Rome.
Emboldened by the burgeoning numbers of Christian subjects, Constantine became increasingly confident in his choice of faith. Constantine moved Christianity to the centre of Roman life. In Rome, churches were typically built on the fringes of the city, but in Constantinople, they were right in its heart.
Churches like this, the Church of E08, the Church of Holy Peace, were set up slap bang on the top of pagan temples and sanctuaries. Constantine wasn't just establishing the capital of an empire, he was setting up the earthly headquarters of the kingdom of God.
The message disseminated from this city would become the legacy of one of the greatest emperors in Roman history.
Everyone else, out.
The commitment Constantine made on his deathbed was an act that would catalyse the rebirth of the Roman Empire.
I'm running out of time. I can feel it.
Constantine rose from his deathbed on the outskirts of Nicomedia to be baptised. This final act would send a message to all citizens of Rome. Constantine, who'd given the empire a new capital, now gave it a new kind of life. In the words of Eusebius, Constantine was gifted with the divine seal of baptism.
The time has come for me to have the blessing of the seal, which confers immortality. I shall from this time prescribe to myself such a course of life as befits his service.
After baptism, you're purified of your sins, but just as importantly, you've committed not to sin again. Many early Christians left this act until the very end of their lives. Constantine, who'd done so much that his religion could regard as sinful, was washed of his sins just in time.
I don't think that Constantine's Christianity was cynical. This was the religion, after all, that told you that the meek would inherit the earth. And here we have the illegitimate son of a barmaid who had ended up ruling over 1 million square miles.
Is it wrong to be proud of one's achievements? I am proud of the magnificent churches I've built. I built the new Rome and Constantinople. I know now that I am in the true sense blessed, that now I have been shown worthy of immortal life, that now I receive divine light.
Constantine has lived very well. Salvation is yours, Emperor.
Constantine died hours after his baptism, sealing his greatest legacy. Inspired by Constantine's example, at his death, an estimated 40% of the population were Christian, and all but one of his successors were baptized in the faith. By 380 AD, Christianity was declared the official religion of the Roman Empire, an empire that would endure for another 1,000 years. 200 years after the death of the first Christian emperor of Rome, this great church was built in Constantinople, the Hagia Sophia. Contained within its precinct is compelling new evidence of just how deeply Constantine's project was embedded in the very foundations of the city.
The Hagia Sophia was the wonder of empire. And for 1,000 years, this place was the largest religious building in the world. And I have to say that for me, I still think it is just one of the most beautiful places on Earth. But incredibly impressive as all of this is, there's something else. Now, the literary sources had always told us that Constantine had built the first church here, but there just didn't seem to be any evidence whatsoever for that. But we now realise that actually it's been sitting here quietly all along. Had a look at that little layer of brick just down there. Scholars from Reading University have just been studying it, and it turns out that it almost certainly dates from the 4th century AD.
Exactly when the literary sources say Constantine's first church was built on this site.
It's just a tiny little thing, but it incarnates a vital idea. Rome is now building churches here in Constantinople and right across the empire. So the Romans are now telling people not just how to live, but how to believe.
Christ's message had the might of Rome to disseminate it across the known world. Here at the Cora Museum are stunning illustrations depicting the kind of teachings that had the potential to transform the lives of the ordinary man or woman.
What you're looking at there is an image of Christ healing a leper. Now, Christ's face has been very damaged, but you can see the horrible sores on that poor man's body. I can promise you that you would never have seen the weak and the needy immortalised like this in an ancient Roman temple. But here, Christ's message really seemed to make sense.
Today, we're all brought up with ideas like love thy neighbour. But to a Roman audience raised on stories celebrating their own exceptionalism and often pitiless power, they were truly revolutionary.
Constantinople was peppered with orphanages and asylums for refugees and shelters for the homeless. Some of the first hospitals were here, specialising in leprosy or infectious diseases, and there were even maternity wards. All this was such a far cry from the old Rome, where those at the bottom of the pile were regarded with a disdain that verged on disgust. The Romans had told people how to behave, how to fight and to fear. And now, from this city, they told them how to pray. For me, this place is the ultimate expression of Rome. A civilization that had conquered men's bodies, but that now colonised their souls.
In the years following that critical day of Constantine's baptism and death, the city of Constantinople flourished. But Rome, the old capital he'd left behind, and the empire in the west, continued to decline. Shorn of Constantine's energy and ability on the imperial throne, the empire soon fragmented, split once more between east and west, each half with its own emperor. Divided, each part was vulnerable to civil war and invasion, and in the 5th century, barbarian tribes swarmed across the Western Empire. Rome itself was sacked by the Goths in 410 AD, by the Vandals in 455, and finally fell in 476.
The city that had taken the whole world had now herself been taken, one contemporary said. Rome, for the first time in 800 years, had fallen to a foreign army. But even though some authors wrote that this was the end of the world, it wasn't. It wasn't even the end of the Roman Empire. Constantinople, the new Rome in the East, is the perfect manifestation of Rome's ability to adapt and thrive. It gave the empire a new lease of life, allowing it to have a lasting influence on all of us. Rome's codes of law and order, the genius of its technology and art and architecture survived here to inspire the Renaissance and help to shape the modern world. It is a remarkable legacy.
The surviving Eastern Empire, called the Byzantine Empire by later historians, still held out in the Eastern Mediterranean. The Eastern Empire did experience a brilliant revival in the 6th century, even recapturing some of the lands in the Old West, including, briefly, Rome itself. But it couldn't last. And in the 7th century, this great Christian empire was rocked by a new threat. The Arab conquests, inspired by a new religion, Islam. The last vestiges of the Eastern Roman Empire finally fell in 1453, when Constantinople itself, for so many years considered impregnable, was taken by the Ottoman Turks. The last people to call themselves Romans were now without an empire. But even with the fall of Constantinople, the ideas that Constantine embraced and brought to the Roman Empire didn't fall with it. Social reforms inspired by a revolutionary new religious message are still part of our experience today. So Constantine's baptism, on a day in 337 AD, didn't just help to change the history of Rome, it helped to change the world. For me, the story of Rome is above all a story about power and how we choose to use it. Rome began as a republic, dedicated to the safety and prosperity of its inhabitants, only to become a parable of the dangers of corruption and dictatorship. There are warnings here for us, but also inspiration and wonder at the sheer audacity and magnificence that was Rome.
I've been investigating 8 days that made Rome. 8 days packed with ideas and experiences, with high drama and chance events, with struggle both great and small. Days whose consequences still play out in all of our lives today.
Discover secrets of the Nazi occult next. Famed for not just tunnels and bridges, Rob Bell explores some of the ships that became Brunel's greatest successes. The Man Who Built Britain continues new here on Channel 5 next Friday at 8.